September 15, 2017. Inside a concrete cell at Rikers Island, 3 men move with purpose through the corridor. Their target isn't random. Joseph Feliciano barely has time to react before Jovier de la Cruz, Pedro Valera and Rafael Perez enter his cell. The sharp object catches the fluorescent light for just a second before it slashes across his face. This isn't an isolated act of violence. It's business. Gang business. 26 Trinitarios members would eventually face charges for 14 violent attacks inside America's most notorious urban jail complex. But what the indictments revealed went far deeper than individual assaults. They exposed something that correctional experts and investigators had been warning about for years. The gangs don't just exist inside Rikers Island. They control it. Over 550 Bloods. 345 Latin Kings. Hundreds of Trinitarios. Crips. Macballers. All operating inside a facility that holds pretrial detainees, people who haven't even been convicted yet. They dictate which channels play on the televisions. Who uses the phones. Who walks where. And who bleeds. Bronx District Attorney Darcel Clark's words during the Trinitario indictment cut to the heart of it. During their time in Rikers Island, these defendants allegedly conspired and engaged in numerous slashings and stabbings that caused grievous wounds. They allegedly carried out these attacks in order to preserve and protect the power of the Trinitario gang. Before we dive in, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. If you enjoy true crime stories like this, be sure to like the video, subscribe, turn on the notification bell and share it with someone who'd love it too. But here's what makes this crisis different from gang violence on the streets. In New York City you can avoid gang territory. You can choose different neighborhoods, different routes. Inside Rikers Island there's only one bridge in and one bridge out. If you can't make bail, you're trapped inside a system where gang members have become what one former intelligence commander called the de facto authority. The numbers tell a chilling story. Between September 2015 and July 2019, Trinitarios alone carried out 14 documented violent attacks. Half against rival gangs. Half against their own members who broke gang rules. 12 of those 14 incidents involved slashings and stabbings. And those are just the cases that made it to prosecution. October 8, 2018. Francisco Nunez and Paul Corporan found Tyreek Covington and Deontay Boyd in the wrong place at the wrong time. Rival gang affiliations sealed their fate. Covington took slashes to his arm, back and neck. Boyd's face was split open. Both men survived, but they learned the same lesson thousands of others have learned behind Rikers' walls. Your gang affiliation determines everything. July 28, 2019. 6 Trinitarios cornered Julian Diaz. The attack was so severe he lost a massive amount of blood from a single arm wound. December 16, 2018. Carlos Capellan, a Trinitario in bad standing with his own gang, had his face slashed by fellow members Jeremy Bello and Jonathan Davila. The message was clear. Gang rules apply everywhere, especially inside. But how did American jails, facilities designed to hold people temporarily awaiting trial, become kingdoms controlled by organized criminal enterprises? How do gangs coordinate attacks, smuggle weapons, run drug operations, and enforce their own justice system right under the noses of corrections officers? The answer is more disturbing than most people realize. And it starts with understanding that Rikers Island isn't just one jail. It's a 413-acre island complex containing multiple facilities, holding over 5,000 people on any given day, making it one of the largest jail systems in the world. It's also been called one of the 10 worst jails in America. Former gang member testimony from a PBS documentary revealed the transformation. I was the second in command throughout the state of New York at the mere age of 17 years old. Inside Rikers Island, you become a ghetto superstar. That's the reality. On the streets, gang members are criminals. Inside Rikers they become royalty. What you're about to discover goes beyond individual acts of violence. This is about systemic control. About how gangs transformed from loose affiliations into structured organizations with constitutions, hierarchies, and business operations generating hundreds of thousands of dollars. About how correction officers, desperate or corrupted, became partners in smuggling operations. About how drugs worth 10 to 20 times their street value flow through jail cells every single day. Most importantly, you'll understand why experts say this matters far beyond Rikers Island's fences. As one assistant U.S. attorney put it during a Latin Kings prosecution, today's prisoner is tomorrow's neighbor. The gangs controlling New York's jails aren't staying there. They're recruiting, training, building. And when members get released, they take that structure, that violence, that organization back to the streets. This is the story of how America's criminal justice system created the perfect breeding ground for organized crime. How jails meant to hold people before trial became universities for gang warfare. And how 5 decades of gang evolution turned corrections officers from authority figures into targets, bystanders, or accomplices. Welcome to the empire behind bars.
If you enjoy real, gripping prison documentaries and true stories, don't forget to like this video, leave a comment, and share it with your friends and family. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss more shocking and exclusive content.
The Francis R. Buono Memorial Bridge stretches 4,200 feet across the East River. For most New Yorkers, it's invisible infrastructure connecting Queens to an island they'd rather forget exists. For the 5,000 to 7,000 people trapped on the other side, it's the only road to freedom. And for the gangs who've claimed Rikers Island as their territory, it's the gateway to their empire. Walk into any housing unit at Rikers and you'll see it immediately. The Bloods control certain day rooms. Latin Kings dominate others. Trinitarios have carved out their space. Crips hold their ground. These aren't loose associations. They're structured organizations with clear hierarchies, written constitutions, and enforcement mechanisms that would impress corporate America. Raymond Colon learned the Latin King structure the hard way. As a second-in-command, or cacique, he oversaw operations not just in his housing unit but across multiple facilities. The organization didn't disappear at the prison gates. It intensified. According to federal prosecutors, the Latin Kings operated with military precision. Each member had a rank. Each rank had responsibilities. And everyone answered up the chain. The Bloods took it even further. With over 550 documented members inside Rikers by 2019, they represented the largest gang presence in the facility. But numbers alone don't explain control. Organization does. Former gang investigators revealed that Bloods members inside Rikers maintained constant communication with street leadership. Decisions made in housing units affected operations in the Bronx. Orders from the Bronx dictated violence inside the jail. It's a feedback loop that turns pretrial detention into advanced gang training. Here's what civilians don't understand about jail versus prison. Prison is where people serve sentences after conviction. County jails like Rikers hold people awaiting trial. Some have been there for days. Others for years, unable to make bail, caught in a broken system that presumes innocence while keeping them caged. The average stay at Rikers is 42 days. But for many, especially those facing serious charges or unable to afford bail, months and years disappear behind those walls. That time frame creates a unique problem. Prisons can separate gang members, move them to different facilities, lock them in solitary for years. Jails have constant turnover. New arrivals every day. Releases every day. Just dynamic, chaotic. And gangs have learned to exploit that chaos perfectly. When a new prisoner arrives at Rikers, gang members identify him within hours. Sometimes minutes. They look for tattoos. Listen for speech patterns. Ask the right questions. Brooklyn? Which neighborhood? Who do you run with? The answers determine everything that happens next. If you're affiliated, you find your people. Protection. Structure. A network that will get you commissary if you're broke, defend you if you're attacked, and connect you to power that corrections officers can't touch. Former gang members describe it as instant family. You step off the bus alone and scared. Within a day, you're part of something that feels bigger than yourself. If you're unaffiliated, you have choices. Stay neutral and navigate carefully. Pay for protection. Or get recruited. The recruitment pitch is sophisticated. Gang leaders don't just offer safety. They offer purpose. Identity. A future that makes sense when the court system has already shown you how little society values your freedom. Ronald Takor learned this in the worst way possible. September 2012. The 25-year-old was housed in the North Infirmary Command, a medical unit where you'd expect extra supervision. You'd be wrong. Takor was beaten to death by multiple inmates. The official investigation revealed he wasn't killed for being in a rival gang. He was killed for refusing to join one. His death sparked outrage. Lawsuits. Promises of reform. But the violence continued because the fundamental problem remained unsolved. Gangs didn't control Rikers through strength alone. They controlled it because the Department of Correction had lost control. The numbers are staggering. In 2013, Rikers Island recorded 1,059 fights. That's 3 fights every single day in just one jail complex. By 2015, The facility had the highest rate of violence per capita of any American jail. Inmates assaulted corrections officers at rates 10 times higher than the national average. Officers assaulted inmates at rates that triggered federal investigations. Violence became the language of control. But here's what makes gang control at Rikers different from street gang activity. On the streets, gangs fight over drug corners, territory, respect. Inside Rikers, they fight over something more valuable: institutional power. The gang that controls a housing unit doesn't just protect its members. It controls the phones, the televisions. Who eats first? Who gets commissary? Who gets left alone? Former correction officers described the reality in testimony before the New York City Council. In certain housing units, gang leaders essentially ran the facility. They decided which channels played on the TV. If corrections officers tried to change it, fights erupted. They controlled phone access, selling time on institutional phones to inmates who couldn't afford commissary. They determined where people sat, where they walked, even where they slept. One retired corrections captain put it bluntly: "We had the keys. They had the kingdom." The Eric M. Taylor Center, known as EMTC, became one of the most notorious examples. This facility, designed for young adults aged 18 to 21, turned into a battleground. Gang members fought for dominance not with fists alone but with systematic violence that sent a message: challenge our authority and you'll bleed. March 2019 indictments revealed the scope. 26 Trinitarios members faced charges for running what prosecutors called a criminal enterprise inside Rikers. But the charges barely scratched the surface of their control. These weren't isolated incidents. They were coordinated attacks designed to maintain power, eliminate rivals, and enforce gang law in a facility where official law had become a suggestion. The Trinitarios' rise inside Rikers mirrors their expansion on New York streets. Originally formed in the 1980s by Dominican inmates at the Otisville Correctional Facility, the gang was built inside prison walls. Their motto, Dios, Patria y Libertad, God, Country, and Liberty, sounds noble. Their actions tell a different story. By the 2010s, Trinitarios had become one of the most violent gangs in New York City, responsible for brutal machete attacks that made national headlines. Inside Rikers, they brought that violence with them. And they refined it. June 4, 2018. Michael Densley made the mistake of disrespecting a Trinitario member. 4 gang members cornered him in a housing unit. The slashing was so severe that blood pooled on the floor before corrections officers could respond. Densley survived, but he learned the lesson the attack intended to teach. Gang respect isn't optional. It's survival. The weapons themselves tell a story about gang sophistication. Corrections officers confiscated thousands of improvised weapons each year at Rikers. Sharpened toothbrushes, metal strips from beds, plastic utensils melted and formed into blades, razors pulled from disposable shavers and embedded in soap or plastic handles. Former inmates described the manufacturing process. It takes time, patience, and knowledge passed down from experienced gang members to new recruits. A simple toothbrush becomes a weapon through hours of grinding against concrete. The result is crude but effective. Effective enough to slash faces, puncture lungs, and send messages written in scar tissue. But weapons are just tools. The real power comes from organization. And no gang demonstrated organizational sophistication better than the Latin Kings. Federal prosecutors outlined their structure during a 2012 prosecution. At the top, the Corona, or Crown Council, set policy. Below them, regional leaders called caciques oversaw operations in specific areas. Inside Rikers, each housing unit had an Inca, who reported up the chain. Below the Incas, enforcers carried out orders. At the bottom, new recruits called premiums proved their loyalty through violence. This wasn't a loose street gang. It was a paramilitary organization operating inside a government facility. Raymond Colon's case revealed how deep this went. As a high-ranking Latin king, he didn't just manage gang operations inside his housing unit. He coordinated with members across multiple facilities and maintained connections to street leadership. When prosecutors searched his cell, they found written records detailing gang business, member rosters, and violation reports for members who broke gang rules. Yes, violation reports. The Latin Kings maintained their own internal justice system. Members who failed to follow orders, who showed cowardice, who disrespected leadership, faced gang trials. The punishments ranged from beatings to expulsion to death. And Rikers Island corrections officers couldn't stop it because many didn't even know it was happening. The failure wasn't just about corruption, though corruption played its role. It was about numbers. By 2014, Rikers Island employed roughly 9,000 corrections officers to manage a population that fluctuated between 10,000 and 14,000 inmates. That sounds adequate until you understand the geography. Rikers isn't one building. It's 10 separate jail facilities spread across 413 acres. Officers working one facility might never see what happens in another. Add mandatory overtime, chronic understaffing, and a culture where officers feared retaliation from both inmates and supervisors, and you get a perfect storm. Gang members filled the vacuum. Former Warden Andre Ward testified before the New York City Council about what he witnessed. In some housing units, particularly those for young adults, gang members acted as de facto corrections officers. They settled disputes. They maintained order. They prevented random violence because random violence disrupted their business operations. That's the paradox that makes gang control so insidious. Sometimes gang-controlled units appear calmer than those under official control. Fewer random fights. Less chaos. But that calm comes at a terrible price. It means the institution has surrendered authority to criminal organizations who use that authority to recruit, to coordinate crime, and to prepare for violence the moment they're released. And they do get released. That's the other unique feature of jail gang control. In prison, gang leaders might serve decades. At Rikers, the average stay is 42 days. Gang members cycle in and out constantly, taking their training, their connections, and their upgraded criminal skills back to the neighborhoods that sent them. When 15-year-old Lisandro Guzman Feliz was dragged from a Bronx bodega and hacked to death with machetes in June 2018, the nation was horrified. The murder, captured on video, showed 5 Trinitarios members mistaking the boy for a rival and killing him on the sidewalk in a case of mistaken identity. 4 of the 5 convicted killers had spent time at Rikers Island in the months before the murder. That's the real crisis. Rikers Island doesn't just warehouse gang members. It trains them, connects them, gives them organizational skills and criminal networks they didn't have on the streets. Then it releases them back into communities already struggling with violence. The gangs know this. They plan for it. High-ranking members deliberately maintain connections between inside and outside operations. When a member gets arrested, he doesn't lose his rank. He gets assigned to building gang power inside whatever facility holds him. When he's released, he brings that power back to the streets. It's a closed loop that turns the criminal justice system into a criminal training system. By 2019, reform advocates, prosecutors, and even some corrections officers were saying the same thing. Rikers Island had become ungovernable. The gangs had won. Not through a single dramatic takeover but through decades of incremental control, exploiting every weakness in a system designed for a different era. The question wasn't whether gangs controlled Rikers. Everyone agreed they did. The question was whether anything could break their grip, or whether the empire behind bars had become permanent. But gang control is only half the story. The real question is how they maintain that control. How do shanks appear in housing units searched daily? How do drugs worth tens of thousands flow through one of the most monitored facilities in America? How do gang members communicate orders across facilities, across the river, across the entire city? The answer involves the one group with unrestricted access to every corner of Rikers Island. The same group paid to prevent exactly what was happening. Corrections officers. December 2018. Correction officer Katrina Patterson walks into Rikers Island for her shift. In her bag, hidden beneath personal items, sits a package that will earn her more money than 2 weeks of legitimate salary. Inside that package, 29 grams of synthetic marijuana, 8 grams of marijuana, and a cell phone. She's not alone. She's not even unusual. Between 2012 and 2019, over 150 New York City correction officers were arrested for smuggling contraband into city jails. That's just the ones who got caught. Intelligence estimates suggest for every corrupt officer arrested, 5 to 10 others operate undetected. Patterson knew the system. She'd worked at Rikers since 2013. She understood the searches were random and often superficial. She knew which supervisors paid attention and which ones looked the other way. She knew that the inmates she was serving had money, connections, and desperate needs that translated into opportunity. She also knew the prices. And inside Rikers Island, the markup turns contraband into gold. A gram of marijuana sells for $20 on Brooklyn streets. Inside Rikers, that same gram goes for $150 to $200. Synthetic marijuana, known as K2 or spice, commands even higher prices because it's harder to detect. Cell phones, the most valuable commodity of all, can fetch $1,000 to $2,500 depending on the model and the buyer's desperation. Do the math. Patterson's one package was worth several $1,000s. And she wasn't making one-time deliveries. Federal prosecutors revealed she'd been smuggling for months, earning thousands in cash payments from gang members who controlled the distribution once contraband entered the facility. This is how gangs maintain control. Not just through violence, through economics. The smuggling operation works like any supply chain. Outside the jail, gang associates purchase contraband. They coordinate with corrupt officers who agree to transport it inside. The officer receives payment, usually cash delivered to a predetermined location. Inside the jail, gang members receive the contraband and distribute it according to their hierarchy. Profits flow back outside through commissary deposits, money transfers to officers' accounts, or cash payments to the officers' family members. It's sophisticated, organized, and absolutely essential to gang power inside Rikers. Former correction officer Terrence Oldham didn't just smuggle contraband. He smuggled weapons. Specifically, razor blades that gang members used to slash rivals. His arrest in 2016 revealed something disturbing. Oldham had been providing weapons to inmates for years. Multiple stabbings and slashings at Rikers were directly connected to blades he'd provided. During his prosecution, investigators discovered Oldham received payments of $500 to $1,000 per delivery. He wasn't struggling financially. He wasn't being blackmailed. He simply saw an opportunity and took it. His lawyer argued he'd made poor choices. The victims who carried scars from weapons he smuggled might use different words. But here's what makes the corruption crisis so difficult to solve. Most correction officers aren't corrupt. They're overwhelmed, understaffed, and working in conditions that make integrity difficult to maintain. A corrections officer at Rikers in 2015 worked an average of 20 hours of mandatory overtime per week. Some worked 24-hour shifts, going home only to sleep a few hours before returning. The pay started around $42,000 annually for new officers, barely middle-class money in New York City. The job was dangerous, stressful, and offered little support when officers were injured or traumatized. Into that environment, gangs inserted temptation. A few $100s for looking the other way. $1,000 for one delivery. More money than many officers made in a week, offered for a few minutes of risk. Some officers resisted. Some reported the attempts to recruit them. But enough accepted that smuggling became systematic rather than exceptional. Officer Lillian Rodriguez's case showed how deep the rot went. Arrested in 2017, she'd been smuggling tobacco, marijuana, and cell phones for over a year. But what made her case significant was who she was working with. Rodriguez was delivering contraband to high-ranking Latin Kings members who then distributed it throughout their network. The gang wasn't just paying her. They were using her as a critical link in their supply chain. Without officers like Rodriguez, their drug business inside Rikers would collapse. With her, they could guarantee regular shipments, predictable supply, and profitable distribution. The cell phones matter most. Not for calling family, though that's what inmates claim when phones are discovered. Gang members use smuggled phones to coordinate operations across facilities and maintain contact with street leadership. Prosecutors in multiple cases have introduced phone records showing gang members inside Rikers ordering hits on rivals outside, coordinating drug shipments, and directing street-level operations without missing a beat. In one 2014 case, a Bloods member incarcerated at Rikers used a smuggled phone to order an associate to shoot a rival gang member in the Bronx. The shooting happened 2 days later. The victim survived and identified the shooter, who was arrested. Phone records confirmed the call from inside Rikers. That's not an isolated incident. It's a pattern that transforms jail from punishment into command center. Officer Jason Rojas took the corruption to another level. Arrested in 2019, he wasn't just smuggling contraband. He was running messages between gang members in different facilities, acting as a courier for gang leadership. Prosecutors described him as essentially an employee of the gang, receiving steady payments for ongoing services. His arrest came after a long investigation that used wiretaps on both inmates' smuggled phones and Rojas's personal phone. The recordings revealed detailed conversations about pickup times, delivery schedules, and payment arrangements. Rojas discussed contraband smuggling with the same casual tone someone might use planning a pizza delivery. The Department of Correction tried to fight back. They installed body scanners, increased searches, created special investigation units to track corruption. Between 2014 and 2016, they arrested more officers for smuggling than in the previous decade combined. But the problem wasn't detection. It was culture. Former officer testimonies paint a picture of a workforce that had lost faith in the institution. Officers felt abandoned by management, blamed for systemic problems beyond their control, and demoralized by constant violence. When an inmate assaulted an officer, the response was often inadequate. When an officer reported corruption, they became a target for retaliation from both inmates and fellow officers. In that environment, the blue wall of silence that affects police departments infected the correction officer corps. Officers who witnessed smuggling looked the other way. Those who suspected colleagues didn't report them. The few who did speak up found themselves isolated, transferred, or forced out entirely. One internal investigation revealed that in a single housing unit, at least 6 different officers were smuggling contraband simultaneously over a 2-year period. They weren't working together. They were operating independently, each having been recruited by different gang members. The gangs had redundancy built into their corruption system. Even more disturbing, some officers were being extorted rather than bribed. Gang members would befriend new officers, engage them in seemingly innocent conversations, then gradually escalate requests. First, deliver a letter. That's not illegal. Then bring in some tobacco. That's a violation but minor. Then marijuana. Then phones. Then weapons. By the time the officer wanted out, the gang had leverage. We have recordings of you smuggling. We know where you live. We know your family. One officer testified that a gang member showed him pictures of his children at school. The message was clear. You work for us now. Officer Alexandra Perez's case illustrated this perfectly. Initially recruited with offers of easy money, she attempted to stop smuggling after several months. The gang members threatened to expose her, which would mean losing her job, criminal prosecution, and possibly prison time. Terrified, she continued smuggling for another year before finally turning herself into internal affairs. Her cooperation led to arrests of multiple gang members who'd been running the extortion scheme. But it also revealed how many other officers might be trapped in the same situation, too scared to come forward, continuing to feed the system that controlled them. The contraband itself evolved as enforcement tightened. When body scanners made it harder to smuggle larger items, the packages got smaller. When drug-sniffing dogs became common, smugglers switched to synthetic drugs that were harder to detect. When cell phone detection equipment was installed, gangs began using smaller burner phones and frequently changed numbers. It became an arms race between security and smuggling. And the smugglers had advantages. They only needed to succeed once to make thousands. Security needed to succeed every single time to prevent contraband from entering. Former investigator Thomas Murphy, who spent 15 years in the Department of Corrections Intelligence Division, described the challenge. We could search every officer every day, strip searches, everything. And we'd still only catch maybe 30% of the smuggling. Because people are creative. And when there's enough money involved, they're relentlessly creative. That creativity manifested in disturbing ways. Officers hid contraband in food they brought for lunch. They concealed phones in hollow flashlight batteries. They used body cavities. They coordinated with civilian staff members who faced less scrutiny. They exploited blind spots in surveillance camera coverage. One officer was caught using a drone to drop packages into the prison yard. The drone would hover over a designated area during recreation time. Inmates would rush to collect the package before guards could respond. By the time officers investigated, the contraband had disappeared into the population and the officer was miles away. But drones are flashy and risky. Most smuggling was far more mundane. Officer walks in with contraband hidden on their person. Officer hands it to inmate during routine interaction. Officer walks out with cash or a promise of payment. Repeat daily. The volume was staggering. In 2016 alone, over 5,000 contraband items were seized at Rikers Island. That included 1,800 weapons, 560 cell phones, and thousands of individual drug packages. Those are just the items found. Intelligence estimates suggest for every seized item, 3 to 5 make it through. By 2018, the Department of Correction was seizing an average of 100 weapons per month at Rikers. 100 weapons. Every month. In a facility where inmates are searched, cells are searched, and contraband is supposedly impossible to obtain. The implications go beyond the immediate danger. Every weapon represents potential violence. Every phone represents potential coordination with outside crime. Every drug package represents gang profit that reinforces their control. And every corrupt officer represents a betrayal that undermines the entire institution. The gang members understood this perfectly. They didn't just corrupt officers for contraband. They corrupted them to send a message. We can reach anyone. We can turn your own staff against you. There is no area we don't control. Former gang member testimony revealed the strategic thinking. High-ranking members specifically targeted female officers, young officers, and officers with financial problems. They called it finding the weak links. They'd use different approaches for different targets. Romance for lonely officers. Money for struggling officers. Drugs for addicted officers. Once they had an officer compromised, they'd use them for intelligence as well as smuggling. Which supervisors are working which shifts? When are the random searches scheduled? Which inmates are cooperating with investigations? Information flowed from corrupted officers back to gang leadership, giving them early warning of enforcement actions. This created a paranoia inside the Department of Corrections leadership. How many officers could be trusted? How far did the corruption spread? When investigators planned an operation who might tip off the gangs. In 2017, a major raid targeting gang leadership at Rikers was planned for 6 a.m. on a Tuesday. 24 hours before the raid, gang members began destroying evidence and distributing contraband to other inmates for safekeeping. Someone had warned them. An internal investigation identified 7 officers who had access to information about the raid. None were ever charged, but the leak made clear that gang infiltration of the correction officer ranks was extensive. The psychological impact on honest officers was devastating. They worked alongside colleagues who might be on gang payrolls. They followed orders from supervisors they couldn't fully trust. They tried to maintain security in a facility where the inmates sometimes knew institutional plans before line officers did. Veteran officer Marcus Thompson testified before the city council about the erosion of morale. You start questioning everything. Why did that officer open that door? Why did that supervisor transfer that inmate? You can't do this job if you don't trust your partners. And we couldn't trust each other anymore. That breakdown in trust was exactly what the gangs wanted. Divided officers were weak officers. Paranoid officers were ineffective officers. And officers who believed the institution was corrupt anyway were officers who might cross the line themselves. By 2019, the corruption had become institutionalized. New officers arriving at Rikers were warned by veterans that gangs would try to recruit them. Some veterans advised new officers to just accept small requests to avoid being targeted. The message was clear: corruption isn't an aberration at Rikers. It's part of the job. The New York City Department of Investigation released a report that confirmed what everyone inside already knew. The agency concluded that systemic corruption among correctional staff has enabled gang violence and contraband proliferation. The report didn't blame individual officers. It blamed a system that created conditions where corruption became rational. Underpaid officers working dangerous mandatory overtime in a facility where violence was constant and management support was lacking were easy targets for gang recruitment. The solution wasn't more arrests. It was fixing the underlying conditions. But fixing those conditions would require money, political will, and time. Meanwhile, gangs continued exploiting the system exactly as it existed. And the contraband continued flowing. Because contraband isn't just about drugs and phones. It's about power. The gang that controls contraband distribution controls the entire shadow economy of the jail. They decide who gets high, who stays connected to the outside, who has advantages that make jail time bearable. And that power translates into something even more valuable than money. It translates into loyalty. When gang members provide phones, drugs, and tobacco to inmates, those inmates become indebted. That debt is called in later. Through violence. Through recruitment. Through carrying out gang orders without question. Officer Patterson's arrest revealed this cycle perfectly. She smuggled contraband. Gang members distributed it. Recipients became obligated. Gang power grew. Gang power attracted more members. More members created more demand for contraband. More demand meant more profit. More profit meant more money to corrupt officers like Patterson. It's a closed loop that feeds itself. And breaking it requires more than arresting individual officers. It requires dismantling the economic incentives that make corruption profitable and the power structures that make it necessary. But there's another element to gang control that goes beyond corruption and contraband. Something that makes their grip on Rikers Island even harder to break. The gangs don't just buy power. They inherit it. Through a recruitment and indoctrination system that turns teenage kids into soldiers and jail time into graduate school. That system is called blood in, blood out. And it's written in the scars of everyone who's learned what gang loyalty really costs. The initiation happens fast. Faster than you'd expect for something that will define the rest of your life. You're in the day room. Maybe you've been at Rikers for 3 days. Maybe 3 weeks. You've been talking to the right people. You've shown you're not a snitch. You've demonstrated respect. You've made it clear you understand how things work here. Then someone approaches. Usually an older member. Someone with authority written in their tattoos and respect evident in how others move around them. The conversation is brief. You interested? You sure? You understand what this means? You say yes. Because saying no might be more dangerous than saying yes. Because you're scared and alone and this offers protection. Because your court-appointed lawyer told you this case could take a year and you need to survive that year. Because everyone you know from your neighborhood is already affiliated and this feels inevitable. What happens next depends on which gang you're joining. But the principle is universal across all of them. Blood in, blood out. For the Bloods, the initiation is called getting banged in. You stand in the center of a circle. Anywhere from 3 to 8 gang members surround you. For 31 seconds, 31 for the 31 original Bloods members, they beat you. Fists, feet. No weapons but no restrictions on where they hit. Face, body, ribs, wherever. You don't fight back. That's the rule. You take it. If you curl up, if you cry out, if you quit, you fail. You have to stand through the entire 31 seconds, absorbing punishment that would get someone arrested on the street, proving you can handle violence without breaking. Corrections officers sometimes witness these initiations. Sometimes they stop them. Often they don't. Because stopping an initiation might prevent one person from joining, but it marks you, the officer, as an enemy of the entire gang. And there are more of them than there are of you. Former gang member Clarence Dillard described his initiation in a PBS documentary. I got jumped in by 8 dudes. Felt every punch. When it was over, I could barely see out my left eye. But I was in. I was blood. And that meant something in there. What it meant was identity, protection, family. All the things young men crave and society has failed to provide. The gang gives them instantly in exchange for loyalty and violence. The Latin Kings have a different approach. Their initiation is called the coronation. It combines physical violence with ritual. New members must demonstrate knowledge of the King Manifesto, a written document outlining gang history, structure, and rules. They're questioned by high-ranking members. They must prove they understand the hierarchy, the symbols, the prayers. Then comes the physical test. Similar to the Bloods, initiates face a beating. But for the Latin Kings, the number of seconds corresponds to the phrase, 360 degrees of knowledge. Some chapters use 3 minutes and 60 seconds. Others use variations based on local tradition. What makes the Latin Kings initiation more elaborate is the loyalty oath. After the beating, bloodied and bruised, the new member must recite the oath in front of witnesses. They swear allegiance to the almighty Latin King and Queen Nation. They promise to die for their brothers. They accept that leaving the gang will mean death. Blood out. That phrase haunts everyone who's ever considered leaving a gang. It's not metaphorical. Former members who testified against the Latin Kings in federal trials received death threats from prison. Some required witness protection. Others were murdered despite police protection. Carlos Torres learned this in the worst way. After deciding to leave the Latin Kings and cooperate with prosecutors, he was placed in protective custody at Rikers. Protective custody is supposed to be separate from general population, protecting vulnerable inmates from violence. In August 2008, Torres was found dead in his cell, beaten and strangled. Investigation revealed that Latin Kings members had bribed corrections officers to reveal his location and facilitate access to the protective custody unit. The message was clear. There is nowhere we can't reach you. Blood out isn't a warning. It's a promise. But most initiations at Rikers happen without witnesses, without investigation, without anyone outside the gang knowing they occurred. A young man arrives at Rikers scared and alone. 2 weeks later he's got fresh bruises and new brothers. The transformation is invisible to the system but permanent for the individual. The Trinitarios take pride in their particularly violent initiations. Members must endure 13 seconds of beating for each original member or significant date in gang history. But they add psychological elements. Initiates might be ordered to commit specific acts of violence against rivals or disobedient members as their first official act. Miguel Dominguez's federal testimony revealed this pattern. As part of his Trinitarios initiation at Rikers in 2016, he was ordered to slash an inmate who disrespected a senior gang member. He'd never met the victim. Didn't know what the disrespect involved. Didn't matter. Refusing the order would mean failing the initiation and likely facing violence himself. He slashed the inmate across the face. The victim required 37 stitches. Dominguez became a full Trinitarios member. And he became something else too. A criminal who'd committed a violent felony that would add years to whatever sentence he eventually received for his original charge. This is the trap. The gang offers protection and identity. In exchange, it demands violence that creates new criminal liability. Young men arrive at Rikers facing minor charges. They leave facing major charges, more deeply embedded in criminal life than when they entered. The New York City Department of Corrections' own studies confirmed this pattern. Inmates who joined gangs while incarcerated were 3 times more likely to pick up new charges while in custody than non-affiliated inmates. They were twice as likely to be rearrested within 6 months of release. Gang membership inside jail didn't just fail to rehabilitate. It accelerated criminal trajectories. But the gangs don't care about recidivism statistics. They care about loyalty. And nothing builds loyalty like shared violence. After initiation, the indoctrination begins. New members learn the gang's history, usually a romanticized version that emphasizes brotherhood, resistance to oppression, and protection of the community. The Bloods trace their origins to Los Angeles in 1972, formed to protect neighborhoods from Crip violence. The Latin Kings claim roots in 1940s Chicago, originally formed to defend Puerto Rican immigrants. These origin stories matter. They provide moral justification for violence. We're not criminals. We're soldiers defending our people. We're not attacking innocents. We're punishing those who disrespected us, violated our code, threatened our family. The justifications sound hollow from outside. From inside, they're compelling. Especially to teenagers who've been disrespected by society their entire lives, who've watched their communities neglected and brutalized, who've seen police violence and economic abandonment and educational failure. Gangs offer an alternative narrative. You're not worthless. You're a warrior. You're not powerless. You're part of something bigger. You're not alone. You're family. That narrative is powerful. And it's delivered by people who share your experience, who've survived the same neighborhoods, faced the same violence, endured the same failures of every institution that was supposed to help. Former gang interventionist Kay Bain, who worked with inmates at Rikers, described the challenge. These kids don't join gangs because they're stupid or evil. They join because gangs give them what society didn't. Respect, purpose, family. Until we address those needs legitimately, gangs will keep recruiting. The education continues with learning gang communication systems. Hand signs that identify affiliation. Colors that signal membership. Specific ways of wearing clothing. Tattoos that mark rank in history. The Bloods use red as their primary color, though wearing obvious red in jail is prohibited. So they adapt. Red shoelaces. Red threads in clothing repairs. Red wristbands claim to be medical. Tattoos with red ink when possible, or designs that incorporate symbols associated with Blood's identity. The 5-pointed star. The number 5. The letters MOB, member of Bloods. The word Pyru, referencing the original Bloods set. All of these appear in tattoos, graffiti, and coded communications. Latin Kings use gold and black. Their symbol, the 5-pointed crown, appears everywhere. Members learn to draw it dozens of ways, from subtle marks that look like random graffiti to elaborate designs that cover entire bodies. But the most important education isn't visual. It's behavioral. New members learn the gang code. The rules that govern every interaction. First rule: never cooperate with authorities. No snitching. No testifying. No providing information. Violation means death. Even if you're facing life in prison. Even if cooperation could cut your sentence in half. Loyalty to the gang exceeds loyalty to yourself. Second rule: violence must be sanctioned. You can't just attack someone because you're angry. Gang leadership must approve targets. Unauthorized violence creates problems, draws unwanted attention, and violates the chain of command. Permission flows from the top down. Third rule: respect the hierarchy. Lower ranks obey higher ranks without question. Arguing with leadership is disrespect. Disrespect is punished. The punishment might be a beating. It might be expulsion. It might be death. Fourth rule: gang business is secret. Don't discuss operations with outsiders. Don't write down information that could be used by prosecutors. Don't trust phone calls which are recorded. Learn to communicate in code, in person, through trusted intermediaries. These rules sound simple. Following them is harder. Especially when prosecutors offer deals. When facing decades in prison, the temptation to cooperate is enormous. The gang knows this. That's why the punishment for cooperation is so severe and so certain. Former federal prosecutor Jennifer Rogers explained the challenge. We'd have overwhelming evidence against gang members. Videos, phone records, witnesses. We'd offer 5 years instead of 20 if they'd cooperate. And they'd refuse. Not because they were loyal. Because they knew their own gang would kill them if they talked. The fear is justified. Multiple documented cases show gang members murdering cooperators even after conviction, even in prison, sometimes years after the cooperation occurred. The gang has long memory and unlimited patience. But the code has another function beyond controlling behavior. It creates identity. Following the rules proves you're really gang. Breaking them proves you're not. Identity becomes bound up in obedience. Your worth as a person is measured by your loyalty to the organization. Psychologists call this identity fusion. The line between self and group blurs. Gang success becomes personal success. Threats to the gang become threats to self. This fusion makes gang members willing to sacrifice everything for the organization. At Rikers, this fusion is accelerated and intensified. In normal life, gang members have competing identities. Son, boyfriend, employee, student. These identities create psychological distance from the gang. Inside jail, those other identities disappear. You're not someone's boyfriend. Visits are limited and supervised. You're not someone's employee. There's no job. You're not a student. There's minimal programming. You're gang. That's it. That's your entire identity 24 hours a day for months or years. Former gang member Edwin Perez described this transformation. On the street, I was Eddie. I had a girl. I had a job sometimes. I was my mother's son. Inside, I was just blood. Everything I did was blood. Everything I thought was blood. When I got out, I didn't know how to be Eddie anymore. That identity transformation is exactly what gangs want. Because members who can't separate themselves from gang identity can't leave. Their entire sense of self is bound up in membership. Leaving would mean losing everything that makes them who they are. The final stage of indoctrination is proving loyalty through action. New members are tested. Small tasks at first. Deliver a message. Hold contraband. Back up another member in a confrontation. Pass each test and receive harder assignments. Eventually, you're ordered to commit serious violence. This is the real initiation. Getting beaten proves you can take punishment. Beating someone else proves you can deliver it. Court records from the 2019 Trinitarios prosecution revealed this pattern. New members were systematically ordered to attack specific targets as proof of loyalty. The attacks were documented by gang leadership, creating a record of who had put in work and who hadn't. Those who hesitated were labeled weak. Those who refused faced violence themselves. Those who performed enthusiastically were promoted. This creates a sorting mechanism. The most violent, most loyal, most obedient members rise through the ranks. The hesitant, the thoughtful, the ones who retain some moral compass are pushed out or pushed down. The organization selects for psychopathy. By the time a gang member reaches mid-level rank inside Rikers, they've proven themselves through multiple acts of violence. They've absorbed and internalized the code. They've fused their identity with the gang. And they've lost whatever connection they had to civilian life. They're soldiers now. And Rikers Island is their battlefield. The indoctrination also includes education in practical criminal skills. How to hide contraband during searches. How to communicate through coded language. How to identify undercover officers or informants. How to run drug operations. How to extort. How to intimidate. These aren't abstract lessons. They're taught through apprenticeship. New members work alongside experienced criminals who've spent years perfecting these skills. It's vocational training in crime. Studies of gang members released from Rikers show they return to their communities with expanded criminal networks, enhanced criminal skills, and deeper commitment to gang life. The jail functions as criminal finishing school, turning amateur criminals into professionals. Miguel Santos, a former Latin king who left the gang and now works as an interventionist, described what he learned at Rikers. I went in on a drug charge. Small-time corner boy. I came out knowing how to run an operation. How to insulate myself from prosecution. How to use violence strategically. Who to connect with for supply. I became a real criminal at Rikers. They taught me everything. And who taught him? Other inmates. Gang members who treated their time at Rikers as an opportunity to recruit and train. Because that's what the gang leadership demands. Every member is expected to recruit. Every incarceration is an opportunity. The recruitment targets are predictable. Young men, preferably first-time inmates, scared and isolated. Gang members befriend them. Offer protection. Share resources. Gradually introduce gang culture. By the time the recruitment pitch comes, the target already feels indebted and connected. Saying yes seems natural. Saying no seems like betrayal of people who've helped you. This recruitment system is so effective that some gang experts believe Rikers Island actually increases gang membership in New York City. Young men who never considered joining gangs on the streets join at Rikers out of fear and isolation. When they're released, they bring that membership home. A 2016 study by the Vera Institute of Justice found that approximately 40% of young men incarcerated at Rikers for the first time reported joining or being recruited by gangs during their incarceration. Before Rikers, they had no gang affiliation. After Rikers, they were members. The study's conclusion was damning. For many young people, incarceration at Rikers Island represents their first and most significant contact with organized criminal groups. Rather than deterring crime, their experience increases their likelihood of future criminal activity. But the Department of Correction was trapped. Separating known gang members from unaffiliated inmates would require massive changes to housing assignments, staffing, and facility use. It would essentially require admitting that gangs controlled large sections of the jail and needed to be managed as a parallel power structure. Politically, that admission was impossible. Practically, the resources didn't exist. So the recruitment continued. Every day. In every housing unit. Building gang membership one scared teenager at a time. The economic incentive reinforced everything. Gang members who recruited successfully were rewarded with higher rank, better access to contraband, and increased respect. Recruiting wasn't just about building numbers. It was about demonstrating leadership and commitment. High-ranking members kept recruitment tallies. Who brought in the most new members? Who successfully turned unaffiliated inmates into soldiers? Who built the gang's power most effectively? This created competition. Different sets within the same gang competed to recruit. Different gangs competed to grow faster than rivals. The competition intensified the pressure on new inmates, who found themselves targeted by multiple recruitment efforts simultaneously. Jamal Robinson's experience was typical. Arrested at age 19 for possession with intent to sell, he arrived at Rikers with no gang affiliation. Within the first week, he was approached by Bloods, Latin Kings, and Trinitarios. Each offered protection. Each emphasized the dangers of remaining neutral. Each made clear that rejecting their offer might have consequences. Robinson chose Bloods because friends from his neighborhood were members. He was initiated within 2 weeks. By the time his case was resolved 6 months later, he was a fully indoctrinated gang member with a new assault charge from a slashing he'd committed on gang orders. He's not unique. He's the pattern. And the pattern feeds itself. More gang members inside means more recruitment capacity. More recruitment means more members. More members means more power. More power means more control. More control means easier recruitment. It's exponential growth. And it's transforming New York City's jail system into the largest gang recruitment center on the East Coast. But there's another element that makes this even more insidious. The gangs don't just recruit random inmates. They target specific individuals with specific skills that benefit gang operations. Someone with accounting knowledge? Perfect for managing gang finances. Someone with tech skills? Useful for coordinating communications. Someone with legal knowledge? Valuable for helping members navigate the court system. This targeted recruitment creates more sophisticated gang organizations. They're not just violent street gangs anymore. They're hybrid organizations combining street muscle with white-collar skills. And they're teaching all of it to new members inside Rikers Island, with taxpayers funding the facility where this education occurs. The ultimate irony is that the justice system designed to punish crime is actually manufacturing criminals more effectively than the streets ever could. Young men arrive at Rikers facing minor charges, scared and isolated. The system offers them nothing except punishment. Gangs offer them family, protection, identity, and purpose. Which offer would you take? The gangs know the answer. They've known it for decades. And they've built an empire on that knowledge. An empire that doesn't just control housing units or contraband distribution. An empire that controls something far more valuable. The future. Every young man initiated at Rikers is a soldier for the next 20 years. Every recruit is an investment that will pay dividends in violence, loyalty, and criminal profit long after they leave the island. Blood in, blood out. It's not just an initiation ritual. It's a life sentence. And Rikers Island is where that sentence begins. K2 arrives at Rikers Island in tiny packages. Sometimes hidden in the sole of a correction officer's shoe. Sometimes stuffed into the spine of a legal document. sometimes soaked into paper, dried, and smuggled in as a letter from a supposed family member. Once inside, that package transforms into pure profit. A single gram of synthetic cannabinoid costs $5 on the street. Inside Rikers, that same gram sells for $200 to $300. Break it into smaller portions and the profit multiplies. One package the size of a sugar packet can generate $2,000 in a single housing unit in less than a week. This isn't petty hustling. It's organized commerce operating inside a government facility with profit margins that would make Wall Street envious. The economics are simple. Demand is essentially unlimited. Supply is artificially restricted. Prices skyrocket. And gangs control every step from import to distribution to collection. Former inmate Marcus Williams described the system in testimony before investigators. It's more organized than most businesses out here. They got suppliers on the outside. Runners who bring it in. Distributors inside. Enforcers who make sure everyone pays. Accountants who track it all. And bosses who take their cut. It's a corporation. The K2 trade dominates because of a unique property. Unlike marijuana, which has a distinct smell that dogs can detect, K2 is synthetic and harder to identify. Unlike heroin or cocaine, which require specific smuggling methods, K2 can be dissolved in liquid, sprayed on paper, dried, and passed through mail screening as innocent correspondence. A mother sends a letter to her incarcerated son. The letter appears normal. Handwritten. Personal. But the paper has been soaked in liquid K2. Once inside, the inmate cuts the paper into tiny squares. Each square, when smoked, produces a high. Each square sells for $50 to $100 depending on potency. A single letter can be worth thousands. Department of Correction tried to combat this by screening all mail, sometimes photocopying letters and destroying originals. Gangs adapted. They moved to bribing corrections officers, who brought in pure K2 that didn't need to be diluted or disguised. The profit margin was even higher. But K2 is only part of the economy. Tobacco represents steady, reliable income. When New York City banned tobacco in all jails in 2003, they created an instant black market. Cigarettes became currency. A single cigarette that costs 20 cents outside sold for $5 to $10 inside. Do the math. A pack of 20 cigarettes worth $4 outside becomes worth $100 to $200 inside. A carton generates $1,000 to $2,000 in profit. And unlike drugs, tobacco is relatively easy to smuggle in larger quantities. Officer Kevin McCoy was arrested in 2018 for running what prosecutors called an industrial-scale tobacco smuggling operation. Over 18 months, he'd smuggled approximately 400 cartons of cigarettes into Rikers. At wholesale prices, he'd paid about $12,000 for that tobacco. Inside, it generated roughly $600,000 in revenue. McCoy's cut was $150,000 in cash payments. The gang members who distributed the tobacco kept the rest. Both sides profited enormously. And the only losers were the inmates who paid inflated prices and the institution that lost control. But tobacco and drugs are just the beginning. Every item that's restricted inside becomes valuable. Cell phones, chargers, pornography, weapons, food from the outside. All of it flows through gang-controlled distribution networks. Cell phones are the most valuable single item. A basic smartphone that costs $50 outside sells for $1,000 to $2,500 inside depending on features and desperation of the buyer. High-ranking gang members don't buy phones. They're provided by the organization. Lower-ranking members and unaffiliated inmates pay premium prices. Why? Because a cell phone means unrestricted communication with the outside world. Institutional phones are monitored, recorded, and limited to approved numbers. A smuggled cell phone means calling anyone anytime with no monitoring. 4 gang members coordinating operations, that's essential. 4 inmates with families, it's priceless. The value is so high that some inmates go into debt to obtain phones. They borrow from gang members to buy a phone, agreeing to pay back double the amount. When they can't pay, they work off the debt through violence or other services. This creates a debt bondage system inside the jail. Inmates owing money to gangs must obey gang orders or face severe consequences. Some are ordered to assault rivals. Others to hold contraband. Some to recruit new members. The debt becomes leverage that transforms desperate inmates into gang assets. Former gang member testimony revealed how deliberately this system was designed. High-ranking members would actually encourage lower-ranking members to sell phones and drugs on credit rather than cash. The debt created obligation. Obligation created control. Control meant power that extended beyond simple economics. Food operates similarly. Commissary items are sold at marked-up prices to inmates who can't afford to buy from the official commissary. Ramen noodles worth 25 cents sell for $2. Candy bars double or triple in price. Hot food from the outside, smuggled in by corrupted officers, commands extraordinary premiums. One documented case involved an officer smuggling McDonald's hamburgers into Rikers and selling them for $20 each. In 6 months, he'd made over $15,000 selling fast food at prison prices. The inmates paid willingly because institutional food was so inadequate that a hamburger represented both nutrition and normalcy worth any price. But the most disturbing element of the shadow economy isn't what's sold. It's who's selling it and what happens to those who don't pay. Gangs don't just control distribution. They enforce payment through systematic violence. Owe money to a gang member and can't pay? You get taxed with a beating. Still can't pay? The beating intensifies. Refuse to pay? You might get slashed or stabbed. This creates a protection racket inside the protection racket. Gang members sell contraband at inflated prices, creating debt. They then use that debt to coerce inmates into gang activities. Those activities generate more revenue and more control. The cycle feeds itself. Carlos Mendez learned this the hard way. Arrested on a drug charge in 2017, he arrived at Rikers with no gang affiliation. Within 2 weeks, desperate for tobacco and missing cigarettes, he bought on credit from a Latin Kings member. The debt was $200. When his family couldn't deposit money fast enough, interest accumulated. After a month, he owed $400. He couldn't pay. The gang ordered him to hold contraband in his cell. He refused. They ordered him to assault another inmate. He refused again. On his third refusal, 3 Latin Kings members slashed him across the back and arms. The wounds required over 60 stitches. The attack sent a message to everyone watching. Debt is serious and refusal has consequences. Mendez eventually paid through his family scraping together the money. But the scars remained. Physical and psychological. He testified later that he wished he'd never accepted that first cigarette. The moment he went into debt, he lost his freedom even inside a jail designed to restrict it. The gang accounting systems are surprisingly sophisticated. High-ranking members maintain detailed records of who owes what, who's paid, and who's behind. These records are sometimes written in code, sometimes committed to memory, but they're always precise. During raids on gang leaders' cells, investigators have found notebooks with columns of numbers, names abbreviated or coded, tracking thousands of dollars in transactions. One Latin Kings leader's notebook revealed over $50,000 in outstanding debts owed by various inmates and recently released members. That debt doesn't disappear upon release. Gang members who owe money inside are expected to pay once they're out. If they don't, gang associates on the street track them down. The debt follows them from Rikers to their neighborhoods, ensuring gang connection continues long after incarceration ends. This creates another recruitment mechanism. Inmates who went into debt and paid it off through gang service sometimes continue that service after release. They're already connected, already compromised, already proven. The transition from debtor to member is seamless. The money flowing through Rikers' shadow economy is staggering. Conservative estimates based on seizures, arrests, and inmate testimony suggest gangs generate between $2 and $5 million annually from contraband sales inside the jail complex. That's not revenue. That's profit after paying corrupt officers, suppliers, and operational costs. Where does that money go? Some flows to gang leadership outside the jail. Some funds gang operations on the streets. Some pays lawyers for gang members facing charges. Some supports families of incarcerated members. The money creates an infrastructure that sustains gang operations even as individual members cycle in and out of custody. But the money also creates violence. Because different gangs compete for the same contraband market, economic competition drives territorial conflict. A fight over who controls drug distribution in a housing unit isn't just about respect. It's about thousands of dollars in monthly revenue. The 2018 slashing of Devin Mitchell illustrates this perfectly. Mitchell, a Bloods member, was attacked by 3 Trinitarios members. The attack wasn't random. Mitchell had been selling K2 in a day room that Trinitarios considered their territory. The slashing was a business decision. Eliminate the competition. Reclaim the market. Send a message to anyone else thinking about encroaching. Mitchell survived but stopped selling in that area. The Trinitarios reclaimed their market. Violence worked. And that success incentivized more violence the next time competition emerged. Former gang investigator Lieutenant James Morrison described the dynamic. People think jail violence is about disrespect or gang beefs. Sometimes. But most of it is economics. They're fighting over money. Control of contraband distribution is worth thousands per month. They'll kill for that. The economic incentive also drives corruption. A corrections officer making $45,000 a year can double their income by smuggling for gangs. The risk of getting caught is real but manageable. Thousands of packages enter Rikers every day. Hundreds of officers work each shift. The odds of being the one caught are relatively low. And the money is immediate, substantial, and tax-free. An officer struggling with debt, supporting a family in an expensive city, facing mandatory overtime that exhausts them, looks at that money and makes a calculation. The calculation often favors corruption. This creates a multiplier effect. Corrupted officers enable more contraband flow. More contraband means more gang revenue. More revenue means gangs can pay officers even more. Higher payments attract more corrupt officers. The cycle accelerates. By 2018, intelligence estimates suggested that between 5 and 10% of corrections officers at Rikers were actively participating in contraband smuggling. That's hundreds of officers. Not isolated bad apples. A systemic corruption network that gangs had successfully cultivated over decades. The sophistication extended to money laundering. Gang members couldn't just accumulate thousands in cash inside the jail. It would be seized during searches. Instead, they moved money through commissary systems, money orders, and third-party transfers that disguised the sources. An inmate would sell $500 worth of K2. The buyer would arrange for someone outside to deposit money into the seller's commissary account or send money to the seller's family. The transaction appeared legitimate. Money moved without cash changing hands inside. Some gang members ran entire operations without ever touching physical contraband. They coordinated buyers and sellers, took a percentage of each transaction, and built wealth purely through organizational management. They were criminal entrepreneurs operating behind bars. The food service created another revenue stream. Inmates working in kitchens, supervised by corrections officers, would steal food and sell it in housing units. Extra portions of meat, additional fruit, decent bread instead of the standard issue. All of it sold at marked-up prices to inmates sick of inadequate institutional meals. This required cooperation from kitchen supervisors, who were either bribed or threatened into allowing the theft. Once again, corruption made the shadow economy possible. And the shadow economy generated money that funded more corruption. Even religious services became economic opportunities. Gang members would attend services not for spiritual reasons but to conduct business. The chapel was one of the few places where inmates from different housing units could congregate. Deals were made. Contraband exchanged hands. Debts were settled or demanded. Some chaplains knew what was happening and felt powerless to stop it. Others were unaware, focused on their spiritual mission while criminal commerce happened under their noses. The gangs exploited every space, every program, every moment of congregation for economic advantage. The sports equipment room became a contraband storage location. Weights, balls, and athletic gear provided hiding places for drugs, phones, and weapons. Gang members working in the athletic program controlled access and used the room as a distribution hub. The law library served similar purposes. Inmates researching their cases would also coordinate gang business, pass messages, and arrange contraband transactions. Legal research became cover for criminal enterprise. Every legitimate program, every space designed for rehabilitation or recreation, was colonized by the shadow economy. Gangs didn't just operate despite institutional programming. They operated through it, using the infrastructure designed to help inmates for criminal purposes. The medical system wasn't exempt. Inmates would fake injuries to access the infirmary, which allowed movement between housing units and contact with inmates they couldn't normally reach. Medical appointments became business meetings. Pill calls became opportunities to stockpile medications for resale. Prescription medications, especially psychiatric drugs, pain medications, and sleep aids, had significant black market value. Inmates would cheek their pills during distribution, pretending to swallow but actually hiding the medication. Later, they'd sell it to other inmates who crushed and snorted the pills for highs or to manage the psychological stress of incarceration. The scale of the pharmaceutical black market was revealed when investigators discovered an inmate had accumulated over 200 pills of various types. He was running what prosecutors called a pharmacy inside the jail, selling medications to dozens of customers and generating thousands in commissary deposits monthly. But perhaps the most disturbing economic activity was the betting and gambling operations. Gang members ran bookmaking operations on sports games, taking bets from inmates and settling debts through the same violence that enforced contraband payments. Inmates would bet on NFL games, NBA games, boxing matches. They'd wager commissary items, money deposited by family members or services. When they lost and couldn't pay, they faced the same consequences as drug debts: violence, coercion, forced gang service. One documented case involved an inmate who lost $1,500 in gambling debts to a Bloods member. Unable to pay, he was forced to assault a Crips member as payment. The assault added years to his sentence. The gang member who organized the bet faced no consequences. The system worked exactly as designed. The gambling operations also created intelligence opportunities. By tracking who bet on what and how much they wagered, gang leaders could identify which inmates had money or family support. Those inmates became targets for robbery, extortion, or recruitment. Everything was analyzed for economic opportunity. New arrivals were evaluated not just for gang affiliation but for economic value. Does he have family who will send money? Does he have skills that could benefit gang operations? Can he be exploited economically? The economic calculation was cold and precise. Inmates weren't people. They were assets or liabilities. Assets were cultivated. Liabilities were avoided or eliminated. This economic lens transformed how gangs operated. They weren't just violent criminal groups. They were sophisticated organizations maximizing profit through market control, violence, corruption, and exploitation. Business principles applied with ruthless efficiency. And the most successful gang leaders weren't necessarily the most violent. They were the best businessmen. The ones who understood markets, managed supply chains, maintained discipline in their distribution networks, and protected their profit margins through strategic rather than random violence. Former federal prosecutor Michael Chen described this evolution. We started prosecuting these cases like typical gang violence. But we realized we were dealing with organized crime in the traditional sense. These weren't thugs. They were criminals running multi-million-dollar enterprises from inside jail cells. That required different prosecution strategies. Those strategies involved following the money. Financial investigations that traced contraband payments, identified corrupt officers through unexplained income, and documented the flow of criminal proceeds. RICO charges that treated gangs as criminal enterprises rather than loose associations. The prosecutions had some success. High-profile arrests, significant sentences, public attention to the problem. But the fundamental economics remained unchanged. As long as demand existed, as long as supply could be smuggled in, as long as prices remained astronomical, the shadow economy would persist. Because economics is more powerful than enforcement. You can arrest 100 smugglers. If the profit margin is high enough, 200 will replace them. You can seize 1,000 contraband packages. If each package is worth thousands of dollars, the losses are quickly recovered. The only way to destroy the shadow economy is to eliminate the artificial scarcity that creates the profit margin. Allow tobacco legally. Provide adequate phone access. Reduce the incentives for contraband demand. But those policy changes require political courage and compete with the punitive mindset that dominates criminal justice policy. So the shadow economy thrives, growing more sophisticated, more profitable, more violent, turning jails into criminal marketplaces where gangs function as businesses and human suffering generates profit margins that legitimate enterprises can only envy. And the truly terrifying part? The skills inmates learn running these operations prepare them perfectly for criminal careers after release. They leave Rikers understanding markets, managing risk, organizing labor, and using violence strategically. The jail doesn't rehabilitate, it trains. And the shadow economy is the curriculum. The system perpetuates gang control through systemic failures. Pretrial detention traps poor defendants like Khalif Browder at Rikers for years without conviction, exposing them to gang recruitment while awaiting trial. Inadequate programming, overwhelmed courts, and deteriorating facilities create conditions where gang membership becomes rational survival. Upon release, former inmates carry gang affiliations back to communities, exemplified tragically by Junior Guzman Feli's 2018 murder by Trinitarios members recently released from Rikers. The cycle continues. 50,000 annual releases, 60% recidivism, communities devastated by violence cultivated inside taxpayer-funded facilities. Reform requires bail reform, adequate programming, and investment in rehabilitation over punishment, changes that remain politically difficult despite clear evidence the current system manufactures criminals rather than preventing crime.